Okay, so welcome to the first stages of the build of the fabulous Mercedes-Benz G500 on the CC02, and this is the L, which is the long version of the chassis. This is a great kit that was kindly donated to me by the RC Elf, so thank you so much. It's a wonderful kit to receive. So yeah, I've been a little bit busy. I've been having a look at the bodywork first of all, so I shall show you that later on. But we have got the first stages to start doing the build. So we'll get prepared for bag A, stages 1 to 7. And yeah, here we go. Step 1, simple case of pop your battery on charge. So I already have batteries and things that I already have charged. So I'm okay with those. Step 2, we've got to obtain the components from bag A and then make a choice straight away. Wow, we've got a first choice of the build, and that is we've got to choose whether we're going to have standard gear ratio or low speed gear ratio. I think I'm going to go with the standard gear ratio, and we'll see how we get on. Again, we can always adjust at a later date, take things apart, part of the fun of the Tamiya builds, and well, we can go from there. Also, straight away, I can see we've got these nasty 1150 size plastic bearings that come with Tamiya kits. Really, Tamiya, you really should be thinking about ditching these and going full bearings, which is what we'll be doing with the build. So I'll be replacing the 1150 size spacers and in fact all the bearings in the kit with proper ball bearings. So yeah, let's get the components together for step 2, and we're going to be doing the standard gear ratio. Let's get things together. Right, we have our parts gathered together now. We have our MA11s, which are our E-clip rings. We've got 2 of those. We've got our bearings, which I've got in my pot, which is soaking in some oil as we speak. We've got the MA13s. We need 3 of those. These are the 2x10mm shafts. We've got 3 of those, and a 2x8mm shaft, which is MA14, so we've got 1 of those. We've got the MA15, which is the gear shaft A. That's a slightly darkened colour shaft, denoted in the drawing with a shaded out. We have MA16, which is shaft B, and we also have MA17, which is shaft C. We also have our our gears, GB1, GB2 and GB3 and MA20. We have those together, so we now need to put all these parts together, and like I mentioned, we have to make a choice whether we're having standard gear ratio or low gear ratio. And the difference is that the 26 tooth and the 20 tooth gears, they are moved around on their relevant shafts. So if you wanted the standard gear ratio, you put on the shaft B, you put the 26 tooth, and on the shaft C, you put the 20 tooth. If you wanted it in low ratio, you swap them around. You put the 20 tooth on the shaft B and the 26 tooth on shaft C, but we're going with the standard ratio, and yeah, let's get these put together. Here we have shaft B, so we've put on the gears, which is the 45 tooth gear and the 26 tooth gear with the 2x10mm pins through, and the E-clip at the end with bearings either side to support that shaft. So that's now shaft B completed. So part B of stage 2 is the next shaft, which is shaft A. So again, not having to worry about the grease because I'm putting bearings. But shaft A, we need the 2x8mm shaft to go into one end of the shaft, and the shaft is equally distance, the hole's equally distance each end of the shaft, so it doesn't matter which end. We need to then take the 19 tooth gear, which is a metal gear, and we need to engage the pin. Make sure we engage that pin. There we are. There we go. And again, this is just supported with a couple of the 1150 bearings either side. There we are. So that is shaft A completed. Now we need for shaft, this is going to be shaft C, we need the remaining 20 tooth gear, the 2x10mm pin. We need that too to go into the middle of the shaft. We then again engage that pin into the tooth like so. So that's now engaged. We need to, once this is on, we need a 1150 bearing. Here we are. I'm using my bearing, not the plastic spacers, as I mentioned. So that's that bit side on. Once we've got that on, we need to put an E-clip on, the remaining E-clip. We need to pop that on over here. And what I might do, just for ease here, pop that in there, and then do that push down, and again, so we'll go back to that pin, put that pin back in, and engage the pin in the area and the bearing. There we go. And then on the other end of shaft C is that bearing again. So now we have shaft C, and we're now set up in standard gear ratio. Okay, right. We are now on step 3, and step 3 we need some components from bag A. We need an MA1, which is a 3mm by 22mm self-tapping screw. We need MA2, we need 4 of these, which are the 3 by 12mm tapping screws. We need an MA5, which is a 2 by 6mm self-tapping screw. We need 1 of those. We need MA8, which are 3mm nuts. We need 2 of those, and MA10, which is a 2mm washer. And we need parts from the parts tree. We need A2 and A1, which I've cut and made sure nice and smooth off the parts tree. And it first part of this, we need to put in here the nut into these captive areas of the gearbox housing. And I don't know whether we're going to be able to focus this up on the camera, but it talks about the nut engaging in this half of the hexagon from the side of the nut. So you're talking about popping the nut in, and I'm going to see if we can get this on the camera. It slots in, and let's see if we can focus you as much as we can, so that the nut is in here, as you can see in here, and it talks about applying a rubberized cement. So we need to, I'm going to pop some 2-part epoxy just to hold that nut in, a little bit, very little, very tiny. So we'll get that bit done. So and then we'll pop the gearbox together. After cementing in using the rubberized cement and noting the direction of the little 3mm nut that we've had to pop into these areas, you use the 2 by 6mm self-tapping screw and 2mm washer to screw into this location here, and we screw that through just to, it's acting as a way of stopping that nut from coming out. So again, be careful again not to put too much stress on the tightening of the screws, you just need to nip these up finger tight, and I'm using my Tamiya small screwdriver to do that. So that's that screw in place and holding the nut in that section there for me. And then we need to move on to the next parts of this gearbox assembly. The next part of the gearbox assembly is to take our A1 part, again making sure you have the orientation correct, and we now need to put in our shafts from our step 2. So step 2, we need our A shaft that needs to go into this top section like so. We need to take our shaft B, which goes in the orientation, and you're locating the bearing into the bottom of that gearbox. There's a area for it like so, and then you're taking our as drive shaft C, gear shaft C, and we are popping that into place. There we go, like that. And that's in place there, and again the bearing is located in the bottom of the gear, in the bottom of that gearbox. So there we are. So that's in place. There we are. So there, the gears are in place, and you can see you can turn them and the gears work. There we are. So we now need to screw the other side of the gearbox now, after putting some grease on these, and pop the gearboxes together. We've greased the gears in here, so you can got nicely greased through. As you can see there, all the bearings and things are in place. It's a case of popping the case and completing step 3. So I'll just put the screws in and show you the completed gearbox. So here we have step 3 is now completed, where we have the 2 parts of the gearbox together. The gears are inside. We've got a nice smooth gear through there, and I've nipped up these screws. The longer of the screw, the 22mm long 3mm self-tapping, that's on this bottom section of the gearbox here. Again, this plastic, you don't need to go too mad with it. You just literally nip it up with your fingers, so it's tight. So there we are. Step 3 is complete. Right, we are now on step 4. And step 4, we need some more components from bag A. We need 2 of the 3x8mm self-tapping screws. We need 1 of the 2x6mm self-tapping screw, and we need 1 of the 2x10mm shafts. We can just line those up on the drawings just to make sure that they are the ones we want. We also need, from parts tree, the A5, and also out of parts bag A, we also need the Spur Gear, which we have here. And we just assemble this onto the Spur Gear using these self-tapping screws, and pop this little shaft through so it locks in place on this side. And we then attach that to the gearbox that we built in steps 2 and 3. So there we are. I've popped A5 and I've screwed that through gently with the 3x8mm self-tapping screws. So we now pop this onto the shaft. That's the output shaft from this gearbox. And then what we need to do, we need to line up the pin so that the pin goes through here, and this is going to be a little bit of lining up by sight, and then pin is held in place using the remaining 2x10mm screw. So I'm just popping that pin through into position there. There we go. So we line the pin up, pop the pin through, and then using the little 2mm by 10mm screw and the small Tamiya screwdriver, we pop this screw into here. It's only nylon reinforced plastic, and we just screw that through. And the idea of the screw there, it stops the pin from falling out. So you don't have to go too mad, just snip this up so it's finger tight, and that's it. There you go, it's finger tight. And now you can see that if I try to push that pin out, that pin is stopped by the screw. There we are. So that's step 4 complete. For step 5, we need again some more components from our parts bag A, and it's very similar steps to part 3 with the A3, which is the other side of the gearbox housing. We need some 3x12mm self-tapping screws. We need 3 of those, so that's MA2s. We need 1 of the 3x10mm self-tapping screw, which is the MA3. We need 1 of the MA5, which is a 2x6mm self-tapping screw, a couple of the MA8s, which is a 3mm nut, and a MA10, which is a 2mm washer. And very similar to what we did in step 3, we've got to apply a little bit of, I'm going to use epoxy resin because it's sort of rubberized glue, which is what they put it in the manual, where we're going to use these little 3mm nuts like we did in step 3, and where they go in the gearbox, we're going to glue them into place so that they stay in place. The idea is so they don't fall out again. Yeah, so I'm going to go and mix up some more of that, a little bit of that epoxy, so I can glue those into place. And then we can put the rest of the assembly in place. We need also the A6 from parts tree, which is like a cap that's going to go over on here as well. So yeah, let's get these little M3 nuts into place. Okay, for step 5 now. Don't know if you can pick this up on the camera, but I'll certainly try and get this in. So here, the little 3mm nut, we've put a bit of epoxy resin, it's just really a little bit of gluing there just to make sure. And again on this side here, I've put a bit of epoxy resin in. So the idea is you need to make sure that the epoxy resin doesn't block the hole for the screw coming through, but holds the nut in place. So I've done that, that's all there, and it's a case of now just popping this onto the other end of the gearbox and screwing them closed with the self-tapping screws that we need. And yeah, and not forgetting that we need to use the 2mm by 6mm self-tapping screw to hold the nut here that's in place over this side. There's a little hole there. I don't know if the camera again could pick it out. There's a little hole next to that, which we'll do. And yeah, there we are. That'll be that step. So just get that done. So screwing these 2 pieces of the gearbox together. So I've popped the cap on here. It talks about popping some glue onto the A6 cap onto this side of the gearbox, and it's got some lugs where it's into, but I don't. And we're going to see, I'm not going to pop some glue onto that because that's quite solidly in there. I mean, I can't even pull that off. I'll leave that like it is. So we make sure we get the gearbox orientation correctly. So we've got the main spur gear here. Going to pop some gearbox grease on there, and that will give that a little bit of grease, and then screw them together. And we need to make sure that the smaller of the screws, because remember we've got the 3x12mm screws, the smaller of the screw is going to be this top one that goes in the top. So you get the gearbox orientation correct. We're going to line up these holes here with these holes here, so that fits on like that. And then we're going to screw all these ones with the 12mm screw, but this very top one here we're going to screw with the slightly shorter, the 10mm long screw. So yeah, gonna get that sorted and get that done. So here we are, we've got the gearbox putting together now. So we're on step 5. Put some grease on that spur gear. Just nipping these screws up now. So I've put the shorter of the 3mm self-tapping screws at the top like it says on the drawing, and the 12mm long ones we're just nipping these through here, and just be careful here. You don't want to overdo these screws. You just want them nipped up so that they're there. Using my Tamiya screwdriver, because it's the Japanese head on them, which is fine, and I'm just literally going around and nipping those up so that they're like tight. That's it. It literally is finger tight, and you know, this plastic is sort of fairly soft. So there we are. That is now step 5 completed, and we've got, yeah, that's nice and smooth. I can spin that with my fingers easily, so that's good. There we are. Step 5 completed. Step 6, we need the pinion gear for the motor. We need the motor plate, there we are, which we have, and we need one of these lovely little 3x3 MA7 grub screws, which is going to go in the motor there. There is a little Allen key that you can use in the kit to secure that through, and this step 6 is a simple case of taking your motor, which we have here, a silver can 540, which I'll use for the moment, removing the tubing, which we can do. There we are, and popping the pinion gear and motor plate onto here. Fairly simple step. We'll get that done, and it says here we need to set this at 14mm from the motor plate, so we'll get that set correctly, and that'll be that bit done. So it's a case of popping them on, line up the holes for your motor plate on the screw holes there. There we go, and they're all in there now. There we go, and there we go, and then we put the pinion on. So for step 6, got my vernier. I'm just using the depth system on the vernier, and I've set that to 14mm, so from the motor plate to the end of the pinion, like it says in the drawing. And you can see on my vernier, hopefully if I bring that up, hopefully it'll focus, it should see 14mm. So I've just literally used the depth system here. You could use a ruler. As I've got a vernier, digital vernier, I'm using digital vernier just to make sure. So that's set to 14, that is done. So for step 7, we need the motor, which we've put the pinion gear on and set the pinion gear. We need the gearbox that we've made in the previous steps, so 2 to 5. We need this A4 plate, which we've taken off of the parts tree A. And we also need, from parts bag A, we need these 3x8mm cap screws. We need 3 of those, and 2 of these washers. They're 3x0.7mm spacer. So we're going to use the 0.7mm spacers on the motor, so that we got those, and that's going to hold that into the gearbox. And then we'll use one of these cap head screws to put the plate over, so it literally hides where we've just been. So it's a case of just capping off where we are. So it goes like that once the motor's on. So we need to make sure that the motor meshes correctly as well in our gears. So we need to allow that so that the gear's nice and run smooth. Right, so we'll get that sorted. How I get the motor to line up is I put a piece of paper in between the motor and the spur gear, and then push the motor and the spur gear together, and you should get little teeth marks on there, which I've got, and that should be the smoothness on there for you. And all I'm going to do now is nip up these cap head screws so that they're nice and tight. I have put a little bit of thread lock on them as well, just in case. That's nicely there. So that's now set in, and I'm just going to pop a little bit more grease on there, just to make sure that there's enough, because I've sort of put a bit of paper in there. That should be enough. Nicely greased up, and there we go. And then it's a case of pop the cap on, and we're there, done. It should be, there we go, yeah, that moves nicely around. A little bit of ceramic grease on my fingers there. So there we are, that's it. Pop that cap on, and the last remaining cap screw, pop that into place. Again, you do have the Allen key in the kit, but as I've got the Tamiya set, I'm just using the 2.5mm wrench there that I have there, and that's it. Just nip that up. Done. There we are. That is now step 7 completed.